Good evening. It is wonderful to see each of you here once again this beautiful evening that we have been blessed with to worship our God. What an honor it is to worship, sing praises with each of you to our God who is above all. Typically, here on Sunday evenings, we have been going through the book of Matthew. And as I was preparing that lesson and going through that lesson, it kept, as from time to time is the case, it kept challenging me in the way I wanted to deliver it. It wasn't the way I liked it. For some reason, it wasn't really coming together like I was hoping. And so I decided that we'd hold that off a week, and we'll talk about it next week as I get a little bit more time with it. And I would present a lesson that I've actually had and continue to work on for a number of years. Probably every preacher has a handful of those sermons in which he likes, and so through the years he'll go through those and from time to time add in, maybe update them as maybe more information might come available depending on the particular lesson it is. I remember Hardeman Nichols one time there at Brown Trail handed us a sermon of about 10 pages or so and said that was a sermon he had been working on for a little over 24 years before he preached it the first time. I haven't had anything like that. But nonetheless, from time to time that's the case. And so if you have your handout, you'll notice what we're going to be looking at there, and that is dinosaurs and humans side by side. Is it a possibility? Is it a reality? Or is it like what we find today, and so many saying today, that it's an impossibility? And so as we're going to look through this, like I said, this is a little bit of a different sermon as the Bible, as we'll look at, there are scriptures dealing with this, and we'll look at those. But when it comes to this kind of lesson, when it comes to this kind of idea, there's a lot of information that's good to get past so we can get to truth. So with that in mind, if you have your handout, let's go ahead and look at the first point we have there. Can evolution have dinosaurs and humans side by side? Is it possible for evolution to have dinosaurs and humans side by side? Is it something that can be harmonized in any way? Well, when we look at the evolutionary timeline, what we find is that according to evolutionists, this is not possible. As they deem it, and there are slight variations obviously to this, but as the basic of it goes, they concede that the earth was formed somewhat 4.5 billion years ago. That life in some form came from non-life 4 billion years ago. That 1 billion years ago you had a multicellular life somehow get its start. And then roughly 500 million years ago, you start having land plants begin. Around 65 million years ago, if you look at their timeline, you'll have the dinosaurs being called deceased. All dinosaurs at 65 million years ago are considered extinct and non-existent anymore. Human life, they have beginning, and that's the key word, 3 to 6 million years ago, depending on which information you're looking at. They have humans as we consider them today. Remember, they see that process of evolution in these jumps from animals on. But as we see us today, they say that's roughly around 200,000 years. And so when we think of this, therefore, if this is the case, then it would be impossible for humans to have ever interacted with dinosaurs. If evolution is true, if there's a possibility of this kind of expanse in time, then it can't be possible that humans and dinosaurs lived side by side. So can that happen? The answer is no, and several atheists or theistic atheists have pointed that out. Many of you are familiar with John Clayton. He is a theistic evolutionist. He stated this: it is ludicrous to suggest that man cohabited with dinosaurs. Man could not have lived in a world full of dinosaurs, so by the time God created Adam, the dinosaurs were gone. On April 27, 2011, one evolutionist wrote this: humans are 200,000 years old. There is a gap of 64.8 million years between the death of the last dinosaur and the birth of the first human. Final conclusion: humans and dinosaurs never coexisted on this planet. In a book titled Abusing Science, The Case Against Creationism, evolutionist Philip Kitcher wrote that solid evidence for human dinosaurs cohabiting would, notice, shake the foundations of evolution theory. In other words, if there was ever evidence to be found that humans and dinosaurs actually were side by side, lived during the same time, then evolution by definition would end. At least macroevolution as we see it. So the question then remains, could dinosaurs and humans have ever lived side by side? Is it even a possibility? Is it even in the realm of possibility? If you were to ask this question to most people in the world today, I would venture to say that they would answer in the negative, simply based on the fact of the sheer size of dinosaurs as we see them depicted, at least. For example, the Tyrannosaurus rex, it was 47 feet long. Floor to hip bone only was 20 feet. He was 2 stories high, and he could rise 3 stories high. The Brontosaurus, as I remember it being called, it has a different name nowadays, Patasaurus or whatever. It was 74 feet long, weighed some 45,415 pounds. Basically the weight of 4 elephants put together. There's another one called I'm going to try to get this right, Argentinosaurus. It was 127 feet long. It weighed 110 tons, the equivalent of 220,000 pounds. Now these are, I don't know about you, but I remember in school when you got a dinosaur book, you look at, these are the dinosaurs you saw. Yeah, you would from time to time see the little annoying ones that go running through and around. But these are the things we would see. These are the things that we would find, that we would read about. These are the amazing creatures. And I'm not saying they don't exist. They did. We see the fossil evidence of such. But according to many humans in this world today, the answer, could dinosaurs and humans live side by side? They would say no, just because of this type of information. In fact, I remember one man who stated, it is ludicrous to suggest that man cohabitated with dinosaurs. Man could not have lived in a world full of dinosaurs. In an article titled Dinosaurs and Humans Living Together, Mass Hysteria, the author wrote this: they think that Gronk had a pet triceratops and had to avoid being eaten by Tyrannosaurus rex when out hunting. We have been led to believe in our world that this is the size of dinosaurs. They were huge, they were massive. Now, the average dinosaur would swallow up a building such as this or crush it with just simply a step. But the truth is somewhat different than that. However, the push is that, isn't it? Remember the movie Jurassic Park? In that movie, I remember when it first came out and was amazed to see all the different animation and the computer-generated dinosaurs that were out there. But you remember one of those main velociraptors? He was 7 foot tall. He had a claw on him that was said could rip any flesh completely apart. Was fast as lightning and all these things, and it made him sound this amazing, fearful thing. The reality is the velociraptor is 3 foot tall and has a claw about the size of your dog's claw. But that won't sell. That's not what we expect, is it, when we think of dinosaurs? If we were to ask, like I said, people all over how big the average dinosaur was, we would get huge, monstrous, large, big. However, the evidence points out that the average size was simply that of a rhinoceros. Now, not tiny by any stretch of the imagination, but the average size, big to small, when you put them all together, from what we have seen, the average size was just simply the size of a rhinoceros. Now, humans have domesticated animals much larger than that, even today. We see people that have domesticated elephants, killer whales, lions, tigers, things, rhinoceroses for that matter, hippopotamuses. Yes, there's dangers in that. But humans have lived side by side with all of these. If humans can train a killer whale to be able to put your head in its mouth and it not eat you, or a lion, a tiger, or an elephant to help you carry strong logs here and there and throughout. If humans could train and live with animals even larger than that of the rhinoceros, it seems to reason that they could live with dinosaurs. So that brings us really to our last question on this. And the question that must be asked, if we're going to be honest about it and to look at the evidence, did dinosaurs and humans ever live side by side? What does the evidence actually say? Is it true that it's impossible that there are 64.8 million years that do not allow for such a thing to take place? Or is there evidence on the contrary? Now, let me be clear before we begin this. The Bible clearly states that dinosaurs and humans lived side by side. Now, people don't always like to hear that, but that's because the word dinosaur is not found in the Scriptures. I remember talking to a gentleman one time. He says, listen, you can't convince me that dinosaurs and humans live side by side. And I went to the verses we're going to look at here in just a second. He said, listen, it doesn't call them a dinosaur. I said, when do you think the word dinosaur came about? Well, it's been around for as long as we've been knowing about these things. And I said, it's 1842. The word dinosaur was coined. Why would the Bible, written a long time before that, use the word dinosaur? It wouldn't. Like I said, the word dinosaur didn't even appear until 1842. However, when we look at Job chapter 40 and Job chapter 41, we see that dinosaurs did in fact exist. In Job 40, starting in verse 15, we see God speaking to Job. He says, behold the behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. Now, if you look in most translations, you'll see a little footnote there, and you'll go down where it says this, and it'll say, this is possibly a elephant or hippopotamus. I've always found that kind of interesting, that an elephant or hippopotamus, that's what they're going to use. They can't use any other because those are the ones that fit the rest of the descriptions. However, how many elephants and hippopotamuses have you seen with a tail like a cedar tree? Not very many. They got that little thing that waggles. That would be more like a twig, not a cedar tree that was known for its humongous size and was used to build the temple of God. Let's look at chapter 40. Chapter 41, verse 1, God declares another dinosaur. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Now let's look at verse 19 and 20 here. Still talking about the Leviathan, it says, out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils come forth smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. Sounds an awful lot like the dragons we read about there, and as folklore, mythology oftentimes we see in schools and things. It's also clear, of course, we're not going to get fully in depth into it, but from Genesis chapter 1, it's clear that God created everything in 6 days, not because the impossibility of millions of years, in the sense of God not being able to do something like that, but because God himself used the word day in Hebrew there. And that word literally means, every time it's put with a number, 24-hour period. Every single time. The 2,000 times is found in the Old Testament. Every single time a number or numeral of any kind, first, second, 365, whatever it is, anytime it's put with that word, day, it means 24-hour period. And each time we see on the first day, the second day, third day, evening and morning, So the question remains, did dinosaurs and humans ever live side by side? Well, the Bible indicates that they did. And that right there would be enough to answer it. That right there would be enough to answer it. But I wanted to look further. Is there any secular evidence? Because what we're always bombarded with is that there is zero evidence that humans and dinosaurs live side by side. There's nothing out there. You'll hear the average or just about every single textbook that's out there on science for the most part. You'll hear that from one man as he was sitting in the chair with a judge as they were suing students for having their Bible and speaking on creation. This atheist sat in his chair and said, listen, it is a fact that dinosaurs and humans, they never existed, that all this took place millions and millions of years. It's a fact, as he put it. Is there any secular evidence that humans and dinosaurs lived together? The answer might surprise you, but actually there's a ton of evidence. There's tons and tons of evidence. Even though the word dinosaur was not coined, as we mentioned, until 1842, there was a name given to dinosaurs, in which we've already mentioned, and that is the name dragon. We've been told for years that those are just mythology, that those things are made up. And don't get me wrong, there are exceptional stories that have been ad-libbed upon with many things concerning these dragons. But the overwhelming majority of those accounts that talk about these dragons are not dealing with far-out tales, unless you don't believe in them, but rather actual events. Isn't it interesting that, in fact, every single continent here in the world, except Antarctica, has stories about dragons? People who have never communicated with each other. People who have never had anything to say. Those atheists who deny every chance they can that there is a God and that it's impossible to have anything but evolution, they can't even deny this reality. Bates once said this: no other creature in the world has had such a far-reaching influence on the minds of so many people. Animal Planet in 2005. In a title called Dragons, a Fantasy Made Real, said this: there is one creature remembered in the legends of almost every human culture that ever existed. A creature depicted with remarkable similarity by the Chinese, the Aztecs, even the Inuit, who live in a frozen land where no reptiles are found. Even they have stories of this animal, the dragon. Cultures from different continents, people who had no contact with one another, yet all of them have stories describing the same mythical animal. They can't explain it, but they can't agree with it either. It must be made up. The reality is, even atheistic evolutionists can't deny they're connected to dinosaurs. Carl Sagan, for example, had this to say on it. He said, the pervasiveness of dragon myths and the folk legends of many cultures is probably no accident. He goes on to say, it must be connected to our ancestors. And he goes on to say, listen, this is why there are so many stories about dragons that are out there, these mythical creatures that didn't exist, because, or these mythical creatures that no human has seen, because of our fossil memory, he calls it. In other words, he said the reason so many people talk about it is because they're having flashbacks of when they were little lizards running around and saw the big lizards. There is also more evidence that dinosaurs lived with humans than the dragon accounts. See, we hear about that because it's so prolific a lot of times, but we don't know and don't talk about often the writings after writings after writings of those of ancient times who in passing make mention of these strange creatures that fit the bill. For example, Herodotus, who lived in 450 BC, had this to write. There is a place in Arabia to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but it has wings without feathers, and is like as possible to the wings of a bat. He said, man, there's these strange creatures these people keep killing over there. And there's such evidence of it that they're piled up. We could continue looking at many ancient writing after ancient writing about what is this dragon or these creatures of reptilian example. But is there any visual evidence? You know, it's one thing for people to write about dragons because, how do we disprove story from fact? Is there any visual evidence out there that humans and dinosaurs were actually side by side? The reality is that there's lots of evidence. The Khmer civilization under King Jayavarman VII in 1186 started building the temple Ta Param in Southeast Asia. This stone temple had many carvings in it, but notice which one stands out from 1186 AD. Notice this drawing. Under the Kachina Bridge in southeastern Utah, the third largest natural bridge, there are many paintings dating anywhere from 700 to about 1250 years ago. This is up in Utah. Notice the man next to the dinosaur. In the Grand Canyon, more specifically the Havasupai Canyon. I'm going to need some Indian help probably on some of these. We find another drawing of a dinosaur. This was found less than 100 miles from a known fossilized dinosaur tracks, as we see a drawing. It gets more impressive though. In the town of Acrabaro, in the state of Guadalajara in Mexico, we find many clay figures that have been dug up representing dinosaurs. These were dug up in 1945, but they date back to the 1600s. Now remember, the first fossil wasn't officially recorded until 1842, where it got the name dinosaur. Not the 1600s. Javier de Cuellar started collecting stones with colorful art on them that dated back between 500 and 1500 AD. These stones turned out to be Inca burial stones they later discovered. However, if you look pretty close at them, you see they represent dinosaurs, all of them. These were burial stones. Now this is some of these date to 1500 AD. We could go on and on. There are thousands of examples like this. Things we don't ever hear about. Things we never see. And usually what happens when you have something like this, you have stuff made up, even though by their own tests, they date back to these dates. You know, the same test they use to date everything else with. Even by their own tests, they can't deny the date. But they can't hold to that. They got to start making up stuff like fossil memory. Or the infamous, down in Texas where you had the fossilized footprints with the human footprints that walked right next to it. And they couldn't justify saying humans and dinosaurs lived next to each other, so they said the dolphin kept flipping and his nose would make the toes and he'd flip and do the next one. They did that for about half a mile or so. As he got stranded on land and kept flopping through. It was quickly discredited, but, we're dealing with fossil memory too. The reality is there's tons of evidence. As early as 1600, we see people representing that which wasn't even known till 1842, or at least getting mass recognition. It's not that these have never been, and it's not that they were long gone by the time we got here. It's just that evidence has been suppressed. We don't like to admit it, we don't want to say it, but the reality is true. there is so much evidence to the contrary. Not just the Bible, but secular evidence that it's ignored. And the fact is that only someone who doesn't want to seek it out, and someone who doesn't want to look at it, and someone who doesn't want to take it for what it is and ignore it, will find a way to dismiss it. We talked about this morning in Bible class the overwhelming evidence supplied concerning the Scriptures, and how because of the overwhelming evidence, that's one of the proofs of its truth. The same can be said with humans and dinosaurs walking side by side. I remember seeing a picture, I think Apologetics Press put it out, of a Triceratops being used as an ox. And said this is likely to have happened. About the size of a rhinoceros and things of that nature. Could have very easily happened. But we don't think like that, do we? Because that's not what we really see. The reality is, and the truth is, that God created all the land animals at the same time He created humans. And they coexisted, they knew each other, they were around each other. In fact, before the flood, everyone got along. No one killed each other. And what an amazing sight that would have been, to see such a thing. To see so many amazing animals. And yet we have been gifted their bones and things of this nature to be able to see some back history of, no doubt, what many of them died in the flood. But see some of the back history of some of the amazing things God created. I can't help but be in awe, as Job was there, as he listens to God and hears about and remembers this behemoth, this huge animal, or this leviathan that could breathe fire out. What an amazing God we have. Let's make sure we always remember how truly wonderful God is in His creation. And how powerful the evidence, if seen correctly and looked at properly, is magnificently seen. Maybe it is the case this evening that there's someone here. Maybe there's someone here who's been struggling with things or struggling with something that I'm unaware of, but we always want to give the opportunity to seek the prayers of the congregation. What a joy it is as saints to be able to gather together, not just to worship God, but to encourage one another. If there's someone here tonight who's needing encouragement, who's needing the strength of this congregation, let us be that strength for you. Let us be that help. Let us be that comfort to you. If there is someone here who needs the strength and prayers of this congregation tonight, let us know by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.